Thank you. Good morning. So they're calling for 3 to 5 inches of snow in Virginia on Saturday, and problem-based learning have on student outcomes. Let me say that one again. Inquiry-based learning and problem-based learning provide less than 1 year's worth of growth in students. So something's up. Something's up. Why is it that a model that seems to align with human cognition and how we think doesn't produce the type of learning outcomes that we get from deliberate direct instruction? Why is it that inquiry-based learning and problem-based learning give us less than 1 year's worth of growth, and in problem-based learning, the effect size actually in many cases is 0 or negative for those that are not speakers of the language of the classroom, or students from low SES backgrounds, socioeconomic status backgrounds. And what we're going to talk about today is how to make sure that we take our modern learning work and the science of how we learn and make sure it fits so that we produce those outcomes that we actually want in our classrooms. So let's get started. If you would, please just stand right up at your tables for a moment. If you would, push your chairs in so we have a little bit more space in the room. So we're going to try this, but it's going to be delicate. It's going to be okay, though. So if you would, hold up 2 hands. You don't need anything for this next part. So in about 10 seconds when I say go, if you would, please take 25 very careful steps in any direction and find a new place to stand in the room. How many steps?
25.
Go.
Watch your cord cables.
Regardless of your count, pause right there. If you would, locate your left big toe. Hold up your left big toe. Turn to somebody close by and say, nice big toe. You're looking for 2 or 3 other big toes to connect to. This is your big toe group. Please find your big toe group quickly. All right. You can relax your toes for just a moment, and if you would, make sure you and your toe group have a quick shot at the screen. Take a look.
The last one is to read from the back.
Yeah, I'm going to read it too. So here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the role of creating an inclusive learning environment. In other words, how do we flip that 60%? And we know we've had a successful morning when we can talk about what it means to engage in gradual release. Gradual release is how we address the problem with inquiry and problem-based learning. So we'll talk about gradual release. We'll tie it to your modern learning project. How do you take this information and use it to get the outcomes you desire? Or if you're not seeing the progress you were looking for in the beginning, what adjustments might we? What role does individual accountability play in this? And one of the things that we've uncovered is that individual accountability, boy, that's a little rough, especially when we're also trying to create community of learners. We've got the community of learners thing down pat, but I can't guarantee that an individual in that group knows as much as another individual in that group. So how do we lock that in? And then finally, we're going to evaluate the rigor of the tasks. In other words, am I really asking them to stretch their cognitive engagement? Am I really asking them to grow in their learning? Are the things that I'm asking learners to engage in or that I'm engaging in as a professional, is it truly rigorous or is it going through the motions? It's one of the reasons inquiry-based learning and problem-based learning fall apart. And so that's what we're up to. So before we move forward, I want to give you a chance with your toe group to talk this out. In light of what you've just heard, what are some questions you already have, or how do you already see this connecting with your work? You have about 1 minute and 15 seconds to talk it out, and then we're going to dive in. Go.
This is your camera. The more closer you get to it, the more I lose your head.
I'm trying to tell them to dirty outside.
It's unpredictable every day.
John, I'm looking forward to that last piece that says examining the rigor of things. For my own personal action research kind of stuff that I'm doing these days. Yeah.
I've got to be done by 10. Time is going to really push that.
I know.
All right, pause right there. Pause right there. Pause right there. Don't go anywhere just yet. Don't go anywhere just yet, but say thank you to your neighbors. All right, so what questions do you have? What are some things that popped up in conversation that you want to get out right now? What are some ideas that were tossed around? Yes, ma'am. Yep. Absolutely. So how do we make sure that something is rigorous for everybody? For everybody, right? And by the way, we can design rigorous tasks for any learner regardless of where they are, period. We'll talk about that. Good. What else? Yes, sir.
In the context of a student grade level results are different, so rigor is maybe not the item that's going to motivate them for the mark, regardless of what the rigor is.
Yeah. So how do we make sure that we keep their motivation in the right spot? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with having the mark be a motivator. It can't be the motivator if we want lifelong learners. That last part of that statement is really important. Can marks be motivators? The answer is yes. It absolutely can be. But if we want lifelong learners, the outcomes of modern learning projects to push them to move on to what we'll talk about tomorrow as assessment-capable learners, then we've got to direct their attention elsewhere. Yes?
I just wondering, how would I measure that when the outcome wasn't the 60% what you're needing?
Yeah. So how do you know if they already knew it or not, right? Absolutely. So let's do this. Let's change the order of what we're going to talk about. Let's dive right into that and rigor. That's where we're going to start, and then we'll close out with what we refer to as gradual release, which will fit in with the rigor divide perfectly. Before you go back to your original seats, turn to your neighbors and say, thanks for chatting. Have a seat.
How are you? How's it going? Oh, geez, no, I'm not doing it.
I know, it's kind of nice. It's refreshing. Yeah, it's claustrophobic in here.
How's John?
Nice.
How's your return? All right.
We got a half a day.
Welcome your neighbors back to the table. Tell them welcome back.
Well,
Here's what we're going to do next. We're going to dive into rigor, and then we're going to close out with gradual release. That's how we're going to tie our morning together. To do this next part, you're going to need something that you can write on, draw on, and it can be digital. It can be digital. It doesn't matter, but you're going to need something where you can manipulate it and do some work. In fact, once you get that ready, if you would please create the XY coordinate plane that you see on the screen. Take about 30 seconds or so and grab something to create the XY axis you see on the screen.
oh, can I put this
Sleeve.
Oh, sure. Have a pen. Oh, you know what? I might have a pen. Yeah, I have like crayons. I do have a pen.
All right.
Just aside, because you guys are
Take a quick look at your neighbor. If they have something that resembles this, or it's written on their sleeve, or they're working towards it, give me a quick thumbs up so I know we're ready to move on.
Because the microphone is no worries.
By the way, this is my favorite to talk about. Like it's my favorite thing to talk about. It is such a hot topic in my house that my wife makes me travel so that I will stop talking about this to my children. Tessa's the Easter Bunny came to visit our house and brought them things that were designed to be rigorous for them, not nutritionally invalid. So there was no candy this year. And my kids so far are hanging in there with this. It'll wear off soon when they see their friends at school have candy and they end up getting Osmos. So this is rigor. This is how we would define rigor. Rigor is the interaction between difficulty and complexity. Now, let me say that again. Rigor is the interaction between difficulty and complexity. It's the interaction between what? Turn to your neighbor and say it's the interaction between difficulty and complexity. So what's this mean? It means that any task we ask our students to engage in, anything that we do in our classrooms, anything that we have students do, period, can be broken down into two components, the level of difficulty and the level of complexity. And we can represent it visually with this grid. So you can have a task that is difficult and complex or some combination of the two. So the question then is, what do we mean when we say difficulty? And what is it we mean when we say complexity? With your neighbor, see if you can come up with a definition in 30 seconds of difficulty and complexity. What do you think we mean when we say, as teachers, that's difficult, that's complex? You have about 30 seconds. Go.
Complex thinking.
I apologize for continually encroaching.
Oh, don't worry.
He keeps moving
You have to put a line through it. Yeah.
Also relates to how many steps of things difficult when something that big, like it's a child. It's made up of different higher level. Yeah.
Shut down inside.
All right. Pause right there. Say thank you to your neighbors. So what is difficulty? What did you say difficulty was all about? Yes, sir. Yeah, difficulty is effort. It's the elbow grease behind it. It's the sweat that has to go into something. So difficulty is the effort we have to put into this. So then what's complexity? Go ahead. Yeah, so I'm going to take those three words and crunch them together. Complexity is the degree of thinking. How much thinking is going to go into this task? Okay, so let's play with this. If that's what rigor is, it means I can have tasks that are high in difficulty and high in complexity, and I can have tasks that are in the quadrant of low difficulty and low complexity. Here's how we want to break this down. You can have things that are very low in terms of complexity. In other words, they don't require a lot of thinking. But it means you can also have items that are what? High in complexity. These things require a lot of thinking, a lot of cognitive load. We can also have tasks that are low difficulty. They require almost no effort. But then we can have tasks that are what? High difficulty. So let's go with some examples. If I ask learners to engage in, let's say, solving 4,952 math problems. High difficulty, low complexity. In other words, they just have to get through it. A lot of sweat, a lot of blood, and there's going to be a lot of tears. But if they're all pretty static, just have to do it. But we can have things that are not very difficult, but high complexity. In other words, we actually just do things that aren't very hard, but it requires a lot of cognitive load. That's also referred to as metacognition. I'm asking them to think about their thinking. Very complex, but you don't do a lot of sweating when you engage in metacognition. It's tired when it's open, but you're mentally tired. And then we can have things in between. For example, we can have high difficulty and high complexity, and that's called struggle, where we put learners in situations where they have to struggle. They're going to have to work hard, and they're going to have to think hard. And so it's that combination of tasks or combination of difficulty and complexity that determine what's rigorous and what's not rigorous. Now let's answer the question. Is this different for each learner? The answer is yes. So before we talk about how this applies to what we're doing in our modern learning projects, I want to give you a chance to rehash that quadrant. Now that you know what complexity is all about, now that you know what difficulty is all about and how they interact with your neighbor, explain that chart on the screen, and then we're going to add another layer to it in just a second. Take about a minute, talk it out with your neighbors. Go.
Well, I mean, I think the goal then is to find something that's kind of somewhere in the middle, right? Like you want to find something that's complex and difficult, but not too. So that it's
quadrants are better than any of the other three. None of them are better than the other three.
Interesting.
Right? So, for example, low complexity and low difficulty, we shouldn't be haters of that. That's how children can learn to build fluency. There is a time and place for low difficulty, low complexity tasks, because that's how we develop fluency. We just can't do it all the time.
It's building knowledge.
Then they become fact memorizers without the ability to engage in high complex thinking. So fluency is a good thing, right? Agreed? So just because I'm giving them something with low complexity and low difficulty doesn't mean I've deviated from modern learning. It just means I recognize I need you to be fluent in this particular skill, concept, or understanding. And so I'm going to give you some tasks to do to build that fluency. Because I'm going to need you to use it over here for this more complex task, and I don't want that to get in the way. Good question.
Take for example, one question. Very complex.
One.
Someone making history.
Right.
So, my complexity is
What do you what do you teach for a second so I can know where to throw this? What do you, okay, I'm not going to do that. Let me back up. in mathematics and science, sure. Let me if you are solving oxidation reduction reactions in chemistry, very complex because you've got to balance the electrons. But once you figure it out, it's not difficult. It's like balancing your checkbook, but there are lots of moving parts. You're doing free body diagrams in physics, and all of a sudden that free body diagram is put on an inclined plane. You've added more moving parts, but if you are fluent in certain concepts within physics or chemistry, it's not that it's difficult, it just means I got to keep my eye on things that I didn't have to keep my eye on 10 minutes ago. So you can have the difficulty stay the same because no offense, I was a physics major. I can do free body diagrams in my sleep, but you could give me one that's very complex that slows me down so that I have to check and make sure all things are accounted for. Let's say I'm asking learners to evaluate or critique primary historical documents. If I am very comfortable in the process of reading a primary historical document and then analyzing it and then actually drawing out inferences and conclusions, then I may be able to do it without a lot of effort. I just have to keep a tally of different things in my mind. A learner may be fluent at reading, but then I give them a passage that has multiple cause and effect items in that passage, and so they're having to juggle different cause and effect relationships. But because they're fluent in the reading and it's on their reading level, the difficulty stays at a moderate to low level. I just have to juggle different things. Yes. All of it. Fluency in everything. Correct. Absolutely. I can be fluent in subtraction with regrouping. I can be fluent in reading. I can be fluent in the scientific method. I can be fluent in, and see what I'm going with, as well as the exact procedure for solving a quadratic equation by completing the square. I can get it out without a problem. Does that help? Good? Yes. So let's tie this in. What the heck does this have to do with modern learning? It allows us to differentiate for individual learners. That model right there allows us to differentiate. Because now I can take the same task. I can take what? Turn your neighbor and say it's the same task. And I can make adjustments to it that change the difficulty and complexity for individual learners. But they're all still doing what? What are they doing? Why do I say that? Because oftentimes differentiation implies 26 different lesson plans. That is wrong. Carol Ann Tomlinson never said that. I asked her, and she said I never said that. It allows us to adjust. Yes, ma'am.
Are they doing the same rigorous test?
It is rigorous to that child. Let me give you an example. Let's say I want learners to, here we go. I'm just going to make up a general instructional example, and then you're going to have to do this with modern learning. Let's say I want learners to compare and contrast fiction and nonfiction writing across certain elements. Okay? That's what I want them to do. Or, it's early, but I'm going to float this one. Let's say I want learners to calculate whether countries have trade deficits or surpluses between each other. Let's just say. I can have all learners in the room engage in that same task, but I can adjust the difficulty and complexity so that learners are working at a level that is a challenge to them, the Goldilocks Principle. Not too hard, not too easy, but just right. So let's go with fiction, nonfiction. Compare and contrast is the level of complexity. It's the type of thinking. And I want everybody in my room to do what? Compare and contrast. What do I want them to do?
Compare and contrast.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide 2 pieces of reading, one fiction, one nonfiction, at grade level. I'm going to give them a graphic organizer and an example, and then I'm going to give them the audio versions of those texts. Are they still going to compare and contrast fiction and nonfiction?
Yes.
I've just lowered the difficulty level so that that child has access to it. Then I'm going to go up a little higher, and I'm going to give you 2 fiction, 2 nonfiction on your grade level or your reading level, your Fontes and Pinnell, whatever letter of the alphabet you're working on. My daughters and I, we're very proud. I have no idea what that means, but she's an I. And I'm going to give you a choice of graphic organizers and an example, but I'm withdrawing the audio version. I'm going to come over here, and you're going to get 2 fiction, 2 nonfiction. I'm going to mix them up. They're going to be on your level, and I'm going to give you a choice of graphic organizers, no example. Over here, I'm going to say, all right, I need you to go to the library, the resource center, and I need you to pull 2 examples of fiction, 2 nonfiction, and decide how you want to compare them. What is everybody in the room doing? But I've adjusted the level of difficulty so that each learner in the room has access to that type of thinking, but I've adjusted the difficulty. And you can do the same thing in mathematics. I can adjust the type of word problems, the numbers in the word problems, the examples I provide for them, whether they're in small group, whole group, one-on-one, or individual. I can use this quadrant to adjust everything that we're asking learners to do and maintain the high level of cognitive engagement by adjusting the difficulty of what they're doing. Yes, ma'am. So here's the trick. If I maintain, and this is, I can give you some, see me afterwards, I'll show you some data on this. If you maintain the level of complexity and adjust the difficulty, eventually I'm going to scale it up. So at some point, they're going to lose the audio version. At some point, they're going to lose the worked example, and they're aiming for this. But to get them initial access to compare and contrast, I have to lower the difficulty. The ultimate goal is to get them all at the level of the assessment. You're not going to tell them that. Well, this is so you can pass the test. But your aim is, I need to get them scaffolded in their thinking so that once I remove the supports, they can do the assessment. Your assessment's here. And it's one of the reasons why you don't change the complexity. Notice every group that I gave you was doing what? No one was drawing. No one was sorting. No one was naming. No one was listing. I went to the language of expectation. So that everyone in the room was doing what? Got it. All right, so now that's enough of me. Go ahead.
Are you placing the students and then moving them from from station to station, or are they placing themselves in?
It depends. So his question was, am I placing or are they placing? It depends on your classroom. There's some classrooms we've been in where learners will say up front, I was in one in Kentucky, and I walked up to a learner and I said, why did you come to this center? And he said, on my assessment, I did not do a very good job of this, and this center's designed to help me work on that. That classroom was set up for them to make those decisions. Not all classrooms are set up that way, and so you may have to take a more active role. That's going to be the next conversation, which is gradual release. So before we move on, with your neighbors, how will this help you adjust modern learning expectations for learners that may not be ready yet, and at the same time adjust it for learners that are not only ready now, they're ready to move on. Got it? 2 minutes, be ready to share. Talk it out. Go. Comments? Remember with this rigor stuff, you started it. You asked about rigor, and this is my favorite thing to talk about. So you opened the floodgates, right? Yes, ma'am. And I'll come back there.
So this is really interesting. What sort of games have you had, if any, explaining this to kids from the outset?
In other words, showing them this level. No, I have no idea. And part of it is because at this point, I cannot, I'm thinking, I'm not aware of a model where this was shown to them first in this form. Now, I have been in classrooms and worked with systems where they let the students know right up front, you are all going to be doing this. This is your learning target for today. And these are your success criteria for today. But how each of you are going to go about doing this is going to look different than your neighbor. So get ready. I've seen that approach where they're aware of, and the culture in the classroom is indicative of, I'm not going to look over the fence to see if the grass is greener. I'm just going to accept the fact that what I'm working on today may not be what my buddy across the road is going to be working on. To explicitly show them this, I am not aware of it being done with learners. I am aware of it being done with PLCs and as part of the planning process and a roadmap for differentiation. That's a good question.
Would you think it would make sense for some learners?
If you've, with as, and I mean this sincerely, with as advanced as you all are and as progressive as you are in your district, this is the best place as any to try that out. There's some places in the U.S. that I wouldn't even share this. So it just depends on where your learners are and where your school is and how independent your learners are at monitoring their progress.
Could it backfire though? I mean, in the sense that you've got children and part of the reason you're giving them the scaffolding they need is because they need it and you want them to move ahead. If they think they're working down in one quadrant and the others are up there, is there a morale, their positivity towards the exercise going to decrease?
Yeah, she asked if you've got learners down here, this comes with hiding this.
Yeah.
For example, you might have a center in your classroom where students are just going to work on number combinations, and it's a game, and it's on the computer.
They don't
What's the whole point of that? Fluency.
Right.
But I'm not going to tell them, you're here because you're terrible at multiplication facts. I'm going to say, in today's learning rotation, you're going to rotate through that center over there, and while you're at that center, you're going to play a game that involves, it's on the Osmo. My 3-year-old was playing it the other day, where you have to take number combinations, and if you get the right number combination, the bubble pops, and in comes the fish. Jackson thinks it's the greatest thing ever. But here's the outcome. I have a 3-year-old that looks at the number 7 and goes, I need one of those, and I need one of those. 7. Ooh, the bubble popped. Did I tell him he was building fluency? Probably not. Did I tell him he was engaged in a game and the outcome's going to be fluency? Absolutely. So it also comes with how we engage our learners in the actual tasks. And it's back to that old lesson of, do you tell your students you're doing this because you have to pass the test, or you're doing this because that's the learning target and the success criteria for today, and this is how we're going to do it. We're back to the fundamentals of engagement. Yep, absolutely.
Maybe tell some of the students. High school. Grade 1 stuff will go with the test.
The question is, do they recognize that they will eventually get that as well? In other words, if I'm at my center and I'm working on a task that's rather complex and rather difficult, but I know that in about 7 minutes I'm going to rotate somewhere else and get to come up for air, that's very different than if I hand them a task where they're going to sit in their desks for 30 minutes versus next year you're doing a completely much looking task that I did. So some of it has to do with the transparency on, do they know where they're going next? Do they know what their target looks like? And this is just one of those steps, and you're just at a different step than I am.
But there's been high
that has been together, not to teach it back.
They agree with that. Yep.
And then you find that you still have your own stuff. That we're not going to win. Are working on your task because how much the higher learners become stagnant, but at the same time you don't want to give up on your.
Absolutely.
So are you doing like smaller lessons at that point?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you asked, because that's what we're going to close with. This is where the gradual release model comes in. One of the ways, here we go. Big idea. Not my big idea, but it is a big one. One of the ways that we can adjust the difficulty and complexity is through teacher scaffolding or teacher responsibility through the gradual release model. Let me show you what I mean. So this is the gradual release model. And let me show you where this came from. It came from the idea that the type of instruction and learning that I provide can be scaffolded and adjusted based on the teacher responsibility, what's my role in the instruction, and what's the learner's role in the instruction. Right? So there are going to be some learners that, because of their gap in where they are versus where I need them to be, is so big that I need to provide and take full responsibility and provide focused instruction. And then there are those that are almost there, and so there's going to be guided instruction. So some of my responsibility is being handed over, and they're going to take some of it. And then there are times when I can say, all right, I'm going to watch from afar, but I'm going to put you with a group of learners and let you collaborate in your learning. And then there's the independent side, and that's the gradual release model. So what you're talking about is, as I engage learners in these tasks, when I find out that I've got learners that are in this certain group that need additional surface learning, background knowledge, prior knowledge put into place, then I need to take full responsibility and provide some focused instruction for those learners. And it could happen at any time in the progression. It doesn't have to be the intro, and I'm going to make fun of how secondary math and science folks. We're awful about this. Good morning. Today we're going to start our unit on solving equations. I'm going to make the assumption you have no idea what I'm talking about, and so for the next 2 days I'm going to lecture to you about how to do this. Wrong. That is not supported by math instruction anywhere in the research. It could be that I give you a task, figure out, oh wait, you crushed it in about 30 seconds, and you don't even have your name on the paper. Pause, adjust, independent, focused. Ooh, you're almost there, collaborative. And so it allows us to pause, create many lessons, and decide what kind of gradual release model I need to put in place. That's exactly what you're talking about. And so it's how to get students to go from I do it, where we have full responsibility as the teacher, to now we're going to do it together, where I hand the responsibility over to them. That's the gradual release model. All right, so here's what I want you to do with your table mates. Let's tie it back into modern learning. Somebody asked before we start out, this may be one of our last tasks. Somebody asked before we start, well, how do we know? How do we know we don't have the 60%? How do I make sure that what I'm talking about you don't already know? That's part of the pre-assessment, checks for understanding, and giving them a task that allows them to bring those things to the table. Then once they're engaged, I can start to do what John Hattie refers to as teach to die for. I don't like that acronym, but he's right on the money with it. Diagnose, intervene, and evaluate. Based on how students are doing, I'm going to diagnose what they're missing, what they've got, and what they've nailed in terms of mastery. And I'm going to intervene on their behalf. Need support? Intervene. If you're ready to move on, I'm going to intervene and move you on. And then watch to see what happens. Here's what I want you to do with your modern learning. What evidence do you have, or what evidence are you collecting that would give you insight into where learners are in this progression, so that you can ensure you're not teaching the 60% they already know? And then how can the gradual release model help you make some adjustments for those that need more support from you that are not ready for the responsibility, those that are kind of ready, kind of not ready, and then those that are absolutely ready to take on the responsibility and engage in collaborative or independent learning. This is one of the ways we can adjust to difficulty. By jumping in or backing out. With your neighbors, talk that out, and then we'll wind down the morning. We've got about a minute and a half. Go.
Can you ever go? I was thinking,
Here's the punchline. Here's how we want to wind this down. We can ask students to engage in higher order thinking. We can ask them to engage in complex tasks. We can get them to engage in inquiry and problem-based learning. Even though the research indicates it may not be a wise decision, because when you start to peel back the layers, here's what the research really says. There's nothing wrong with inquiry-based learning. There's nothing wrong with problem-based learning. Here's one. There's actually nothing wrong with homework, even though the effect size for homework is virtually 0 for the K-8 population, or year 1 through year 9. The trick is the timing. Did we ask learners to engage in an inquiry task and utilize skills that they did not have fluency in, or that they weren't ready to take on? Did we hand responsibility over too soon? In problem-based learning, did we put them in a struggle for which they did not have the stamina to do, the fluency of skills to engage with, or the metacognitive strategies to adjust their learning in the process? Did we hand responsibility over too soon? If inquiry is used and they're ready, the effect size goes through the ceiling. If we use problem-based learning and they're ready, the effect size goes from 0.0 something, I'll pull it out of my mind here in a second, to 0.54, which is a year and a half worth of growth. Whoa. It goes from less than a year's worth of growth to a year and a half, and all I did was change the timing? That's correct. But what determines the timing? Do they have the fluency? Do they have the stamina? Do they have the metacognitive skills? And are they ready to hand the responsibility over? So the point of this morning was, as we look through our modern learning projects, we start to see what's happening. Things that have gone astray, things that are working very well. Odds are, if the research is correct, that things that are working well because it's the right difficulty, right complexity, and the right level of responsibility at that exact moment. For things that aren't working so well, it's likely because it's the wrong level of difficulty and complexity at this moment, and I've done something with the responsibility adjustment that didn't fit. I've either held on too long, so they're bored to tears and they're resisting me, or I've handed it over too quickly and they weren't ready. The gradual release model says, get them ready and then gradually hand responsibility off. And the way we get them ready is to adjust the difficulties and complexities of all of our tasks so that it's the right difficulty, right complexity at the right time. It's called the Goldilocks Principle, and the effect size for the Goldilocks Principle is 0.72, which is 2 years worth of growth. 2 years worth of growth. How many years? 2 years worth of growth. But if we miss it, oh boy, stress level climbs. So does the party. After hours. Words of Justin Timberlake, can't drink this one away.
Yeah, you can.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you can. He's not trying. Yeah, exactly. Focus.
So her question was, what happens if the difficulty and complexity, the perceptions of the student don't match my perceptions as the teacher? Here's the answer. Gradual release has to come into play. At some point, they don't get to pick. No offense. But at some point, I say, you know what? I disagree. I want you to try this, and it's a we do model. It's not a you do. It's not an I do. It's a we do. In other words, the transition's happening. I'm going to say to them, you know what? I'd like to check that out. I think you've got more in there. So let us together do this. And that's why the we do part of that gradual release is so important. Because it may be that we need to build efficacy in the learners to believe they can do it. By the way, student efficacy, effect size of 0.92. 3 years. We're moving on to 3 years worth of growth. So in that case, quit giving them the keys to the Cadillac. Say, no, you're not going to get to pick this today. I'm picking it, but we are going to do it together. Because after all, that's our job.
Yeah.
Make sense? Got it. Got it. It ties it in exactly. It may be that their efficacy is low because of prior issues with emotional safety in the classroom. And our job is to show them what they believe they could not do 5 minutes ago. They can actually do it. But give them the support to do it. The emotional safety, the feedback that goes with that. Yes, ma'am.
That size is 7 to 2 years of growth.
Yeah.
Tell me about those numbers and how do you measure that?
Real quick. 0.4 is 1 year's worth of growth internationally. On average, 1 year of formal schooling in the world gives us an effect size of 0.4. That's how much they grow. Just like in first grade or year 1 reading, classes of now they're expected to jump 4 levels. 0.7 is what we see in the data when the challenge that students are given is at the right level. We don't see 0.4, we see 0.72. In other words, their pre and post test performance shows an effect or a change much greater than 0.4. In other words, we move them beyond the average. Good question. So was that 7%? What? It's not point deviation. It's standard. So there's no. Good question. Are you tired already? Are your brains tired? Not yet. You've got more. You still got the rest of the morning. So, thank you for. He said the talk was low complexity. I'll work on that. I'll be around the rest of the morning, of course, with you. But if you have questions, come see me. Thank you for your time as always.